Welcome to Our Christian Heritage. We are in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania today with Dr. Milton Loyer, and we're going to be talking about many of the hymn writers from central Pennsylvania. Dr. Loyer, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to share with you one of my passions, gospel hymn writers. And I have a personal collection of gospel songbooks at my house. I wish I could show it to you. But I have approximately 1,000 different gospel songbooks from roughly 1860 up to 1940 or so. I am also the archivist for the Susquehanna Conference of the United Methodist Church. And in our conference archives, mainly because of my interest, we specialize in gospel songbooks, and we have a collection there of several thousand gospel songbooks. They're all listed on our website, and we get calls from all over the country, a couple a year, of people mainly asking for obscure gospel songs that someone requested at a funeral. And they say, Dr. Loyer, can you find this old gospel song? This was my grandmother's favorite, and we can't find it anymore. And for the most part, I've been successful. But we do have a couple of thousand gospel songbooks in our United Methodist archives, and we're very pleased with that collection, very pleased with it.
Now, when we talk about the Susquehanna Conference, for those who aren't familiar with Pennsylvania, the Susquehanna River is kind of the central part of Pennsylvania?
That's correct. It starts in New York and flows down to Baltimore and Maryland and drains the whole central part of Pennsylvania. And we are the Susquehanna Conference, and we cover about 33 counties in central Pennsylvania, yes.
Now, what's interesting is that there was many hymn writers that had come from this part of the country.
It is. It's amazing. And over the years, I've put together several booklets. My first was called Pennsylvania in the United Methodist Hymnal, and I talked about the different writers from Pennsylvania. But I soon realized that we had enough right in central Pennsylvania. So then our Historical Society helped me to publish one called Hymns of Central Pennsylvania, the Susquehanna River Valley in the United Methodist Hymnal. And it's amazing how many hymn writers lived right along the Susquehanna River in our own river valley. And it makes for very interesting reading, and it's a good hymn program. This is also on our website for the United Methodist Archives for the Central Pennsylvania Conference.
Now, in addition to your role with the Central Pennsylvania Conference, you're also involved with Lycoming College?
That's where our archives are located. I'm an adjunct professor there in statistics, and my main training is in statistics. And church history and gospel music is just one of my hobbies. You ask about the hymn writers in central Pennsylvania. I did bring along a little display with me. The Susquehanna Conference covers, as I said, the central part of Pennsylvania, and the United Methodist Church is made up of three predecessor denominations: United Brethren, Methodist, and Evangelical. And we have hymn writers in all three of those traditions. And I have here a poster that describes some of our United Brethren hymn writers in central Pennsylvania, some of our Methodist hymn writers in central Pennsylvania, and some of our Evangelical hymn writers in central Pennsylvania.
So tell us about Benjamin Hanby. Benjamin Hanby was from Pennsylvania?
He was actually from Ohio. He was from Westerville, Ohio, where his father was a bishop in the United Brethren Church. But he traveled around on behalf of Otterbein University in Westerville, and it turns out he was actually ordained into the ministry here in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. So
really?
That's his tie to our part of the state. The United Brethren Church was a very conservative church. They have Mennonite roots, and like the old Mennonites, they didn't believe in musical instruments in church.
Really?
And Benjamin Hanby was kind of a radical in that respect. He played the guitar, and he played the flute, and he was a pastor, and he tried to introduce those kinds of things into his worship services, and the people complained, and he eventually left the United Brethren ministry because they didn't receive his instrumental music. But the most popular hymn that he wrote that's in many hymn books is "Who Is He in Yonder Stall?" It goes through the life of Jesus, and it's a very, very moving hymn. But Benjamin Hanby is noted in secular music as the author of Darling Nellie Gray. That's what his real claim to fame is. When he was living in Ohio with his parents around the time of the Civil War, an escaped slave came and spent the night at their house, and he hoped to go back to the South and rescue his girlfriend, who was named Nellie Gray. Actually, I think it was his wife named Nellie Gray. And that was such a moving experience that Benjamin Hanby wrote the song Darling Nellie Gray, and that was one of the motivating songs in the Civil War that talked about the evils of slavery and the restrictions and impositions it made on some of the black people. Something else that's interesting about Benjamin Hanby, he also wrote the song Up on the Housetop, Reindeer Paws, Out Come Good Old Santa Claus. And I have a hymn book that includes that song in the hymn book. It's in the section on Christmas hymns. It's right before Silent Night and right after A Little Town of Bethlehem. It has Up on the Housetop, Reindeer Paws. So he was kind of versatile. He wound up spending the rest of his career working with church publications and Sunday school publications. But he was from this area. We claim him as one of our ministerial sons since he was ordained in central Pennsylvania in Mechanicsburg. On the Methodist side, I feature there William Kirkpatrick. William Kirkpatrick was a very prolific hymn writer. Many of the conservative churches today in their hymn book have 8, 10, sometimes 12 or 15 songs by William Kirkpatrick. He wrote such things as Lead Me to Calvary, Jesus Saves, He Hideth My Soul, Oh, to be like Thee, The Comforter has come, Redeemed how I love to proclaim it, 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. And he was raised in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, which is just a couple miles up the road from Mechanicsburg here. And we claim him as one of our ministerial sons and famous gospel songwriters. The picture there shows a Melodion. He composed many of his songs on that Melodion. Unfortunately, we don't know where that Melodion is today. We lost track of it sometime back in the 1950s. It was in the possession of one of his nieces who had it and had it restored and refurbished. But she sold it to a dealer traveling through and didn't get his name, and we don't know what happened to it. So we have a picture of the Melodion, but we don't have the original Melodion anymore that William Kirkpatrick composed his songs on.
Now, the picture looks like a piano. What's the difference between a piano and a Melodion?
Well, a Melodion is a lot smaller. It doesn't have the full range that a piano has.
The full 88 keys.
Right. And Melodions are generally portable. You could... some of them are definitely portable. You could fold them up in little boxes and carry them along. Others of them aren't quite so portable. But missionaries would take Melodions out in Africa and places like that because they were portable. We have in our archives some Melodions that missionaries had taken out on the field. It's kind of like a baby piano, I guess I would say that. Yes.
And traveling evangelists would use them as well?
Yes, in the old days for tent meetings and things like that. Right, exactly.
So the local newspaper attempted to help you find this missing Melodion.
Yes, that was published in the Carlisle newspaper because Kirkpatrick's niece thought that the dealer that bought it from her was from Carlisle, but we never got any response. We had a couple of offers of other people who had Melodions, and they said, we'll give you our Melodion.
Huh.
But we never got the original William Kirkpatrick Melodion, yes.
So William Kirkpatrick wrote many of these different songs. What do we know about why he wrote some of these songs?
Well, he was a popular figure at evangelistic services, and I can tell you the motivation behind one of his songs. Once when he was leading the singing at a Methodist campground in Rawlinsville, which is in Lancaster County, across the river from here, he detected that the song leader was not a born-again Christian, and that bothered him. So he went to his tent that night, and he wrote the song, the words and music to Lord, I'm Coming Home. And he asked the song leader the next night to sing that for a solo. And the song leader sang that as a solo, and that led to his conversion, Lord, I'm Coming Home. There's a story behind almost all the gospel songs, and that's one of the stories behind one of the William Kirkpatrick songs. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, that so many of these songs, especially from this era. Now, this is kind of the 1800s, post-Civil War eras when many of these hymns were written and gospel songs?
Yes, you're talking in the 1860s up till 1920s for the gospel songs.
So this is the era of camp meetings, revival meetings, circuit riding preachers?
Yes, it is. And it was influenced, the music was influenced by Sousa. This was the period of John Philip Sousa and his marches, and many of the gospel songs have kind of a march tempo to them. That was the era in which they were born, yes. Mm-hmm.
So tell us about some of the other hymn writers that you have on your board.
The evangelical side is represented by Elisha Hoffman. Elisha Hoffman's, maybe his best known tune is Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. He also is the author of What a Wonderful Savior, Are You Washed in the Blood, I Must Tell Jesus, and Is Your All on the Altar. He was from New Berlin, Pennsylvania. That's where his father was involved in an evangelical school that was up in New Berlin at that time, which has now evolved into Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania. I do have another booklet that I've written It's called Early Hymn Writers of the Evangelical Association, associated with New Berlin, Pennsylvania. And it turns out that in that small town of New Berlin, there were literally dozens of songwriters in the evangelical church that were there because they had that evangelical school there. And a lot of them wrote songs and poems and music, and I have a booklet about them too.
So New Berlin, just for those who aren't from Pennsylvania, is roughly almost kind of right in the center of the state.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's near Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. It's up in Union County, right in the center of the state. And that was the first headquarters of the Evangelical Association, which became the Evangelical Church, which is now part of the United Methodist Church.
So Elisha Hoffman, he wrote, "I Must Tell Jesus." What was the story behind that song?
The story behind that song, he wrote that when he was in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and there was a lady who had a problem, and she came to Elisha Hoffman for counseling, and she just said that, "I must tell Jesus," and those were her words to him, and he took those words and ran with it and made a gospel song out of it. It was a woman who came with quite a tale of sorrow, and she just said, in conclusion, "I must tell Jesus." Yes.
It seems that a lot of these songs that were written, that especially those that still stick with us today, they're kind of rooted in these moments of tragedy, moments of urgency, moments of sorrow. That it wasn't just that these were kind of theological treatises, even though many of them have good, solid doctrine in them, but there's this emotional concern that's reflected in them as well.
That's true. And that's, I guess, the main difference between what we call a gospel song and a hymn. The hymns are usually centered on God and praising God or creation, where gospel songs are written more about personal experience with Jesus and dealing with sorrow and tragedy in one's life. And many of our mainline church hymnals have very few gospel songs. They concentrate on the hymns. I'm glad to see that in our United Methodist hymnal, we do have a good selection of gospel songs because they were a part of all the traditions in the United Methodist Church. And quite frankly, when the pastor asks for selections from the congregation, and it's usually the gospel songs that people call out, and those are the ones they like to sing. Those are the ones that move people quite a bit. The old gospel songs were written out of experiences of the day. And back in those days, of course, people traveled by train, by boat, and you have some great classics. You have "Life is Like a Mountain Railroad" by Charlie Tillman. You have a lot of songs about "I was sinking deep in sin," about being out on the boat in the ocean and so forth. There's even a song that used to be quite popular called "The Royal Telephone" when telephones first came out. It says, "Central to never busy," when you call God on the royal telephone. And they don't write songs like that anymore out of those kinds of experiences, which is sad. And we have a lot of agricultural songs, sowing, about harvest and reaping and so forth.
Bringing in the sheaves.
Bringing in the sheaves, that's what I was trying to think of. Today, the songs that are written do not reflect our personal lives the way they did back in those days. Where are the songs about airplanes? Where are the songs about space travel? Where are the songs about automobiles? We don't have them. Contemporary Christian music today really has gone back to the Old Testament. We talk about images of rocks from Psalms and so forth. Jesus is my fortress, my rock. But we're missing out on this idea of relating our music to what's going on in our practical everyday life.
But that's what many of these hymns and the gospel songs in the 1880s, it was their personal experiences that was what was bringing it out. Yes. Somebody else from the area that's found out is James Milton Black.
James Milton Black. He's one of my favorites. He was from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where I work, where our conference archives are located. And he's most well known for his song, "When the Roll is Called Up Yonder." And that was the first gospel song that he ever wrote, and there's a story behind that. He was the leader of the Epworth youth group in his church in Williamsport, a Methodist Episcopal Church. That would be similar to youth fellowship today. They called it the Epworth League. And one day he saw a poor girl, dressed very poorly, wandering down by the river in Williamsport, and invited her to come to the Epworth League meetings that he ran as a youth fellowship. And she said, well, she couldn't come because she didn't have proper clothes. Well, he got her some nice clothes to wear, I say nice clothes, just some respectable clothes. And she came, and she was a regular at the meetings for quite a while. And then one day she wasn't there anymore. And James Black inquired and found out that she was ill with typhoid. And before he could go visit her, she passed away very quickly from that dreaded disease. And he thought it would be sad that she would not be there anymore to answer the roll call at the Epworth meetings. And so he went home and composed the song, "When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, I'll Be There." And it was in memory of this young girl who had been attending the meetings. And that's a favorite song of a lot of people. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. James Black went on to write many more songs in Williamsport, and he encouraged a lot of other people to write songs, and he wrote music for their poems. In 2004, I wrote a book, James M. Black and Friends, Contributions of Williamsport, PA to American Gospel Music. And Williamsport, PA was quite a center for gospel music, mainly because of James M. Black and a music publisher that happened to be there too, by the name of Vandersloot. He published a lot of Black's music. James M. Black went on to become involved in the Methodist denomination, writing hymns and putting together songbooks for the Epworth League nationally, for the national organization. Once his song about "When the Roll is Called Up Yonder" gained popularity and he became well known, they put him to work, and he was instrumental in selecting hymns for some of the United Methodist, or some of the Methodist hymnals back in 1905. The very first really modern hymnal that included music and words together and responsive readings and so forth. James M. Black was on that committee that put that hymnal together. One of my favorite James M. Black stories, though, has to do with the song "When the Saints Go Marching In." It turns out that in 1896, James Black and a lady by the name of Catherine Purvis wrote a song called "When the Saints Are Marching In." And that was published in some of James M. Black's songbooks.
But this wasn't the same song.
No, it's not the same song at all. This was called "When the Saints Are Marching In." "When the Saints Go Marching In" has been around for a long time. And for many years, it was just listed as anonymous or a Negro spiritual. Nobody really knew who wrote that song. It was just a song that grew up. Well, what happened was in 1957, there was a lady from Williamsport who was doing a PhD thesis at Penn State University on the history of music in Williamsport. And she talked about James M. Black, and she talked about his 1896 song, "When the Saints Are Marching In." And she concluded her segment on James M. Black with the statement that this song, "When the Saints Are Marching In," quote, "has taken on a tremendous burst of popularity in recent months and has become a favorite hit with the Dixieland bands." She was confusing it with "When the Saints Go Marching In." And then in 1971, in the edition of the Book of World Famous Music, that's edited by James Fold, who was a renowned scholar in musicology in this country, he picked up on this thesis, and he put in his book, this is what he said: "The written history of this Negro spiritual commences with the 1896 song, 'When the Saints Are Marching In' by James M. Black. The music and words are quite similar to those in the present form, and in particular the famous echo." They repeat phrases over and over again. Fold did not identify James M. Black as the author formally, but he made that connection, and he said that was the beginning of the song, "When the Saints Go Marching In." Well, then finally in 1984, the Oxford University Press published a definitive book called The Great Song Thesaurus, and there they came out and they said that Catherine E. Purvis and James M. Black in 1896 wrote "When the Saints Go Marching In." And that's not true. But that began to be picked up then on, if you bought records, if you bought tapes, if you went on the internet, it would say, "When the Saints Go Marching In" by James M. Black and Catherine Purvis. Two white people from Williamsport, Pennsylvania were given credit for writing "When the Saints Go Marching In," which is not true. And I tried to debunk that in my 2004 book on James M. Black and Friends, and said he did not write that. It's that the meter is different, the imagery is different, it's two different songs, it's just that their title are different by one word. But that didn't help the situation. As it turns out, 2 years later, in 2006, the Songwriters Hall of Fame gave a special award to When the Saints Go Marching In, and they said it was written by Catherine E. Purvis and James M. Black of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. So then I wrote another article in 2010 that was published in a journal about Catherine Purvis, and it explained all that I just went through about how this rumor got started and how they did not write When the Saints Go Marching In. And that article was in a journal that was put on the internet and so forth, and now that was picked up. So now if you go online and look up When the Saints Go Marching In, it'll probably say, and it'll cite my article, and it'll quote me saying this was not written by Catherine Purvis and James M. Black. And I think we finally debunked that. But for several years there, for a period from 1980 to 2010, that's what all the literature said, that When the Saints Go Marching In was written by James M. Black. He wrote When the Saints Are Marching In, and it's two different songs.
Oh, my.
Yes.
But we are sure that he did write When the World Is Called Up Yonder.
Yes, we're sure about that. Yes, we're sure about that.
Great. So what else do we know about James M. Black?
Well, he was a very private person. He edited lots of songbooks. I give hymn programs on many people, and I have a hymn program that I give on James M. Black. We have about, in our archives, about 100 copies of one of his songbooks, New Junior Songs. And I have a hymn program put together where I pass out these books for people to use, not to keep. And we sing his songs, and I explain the circumstances under which the various songs were written, and tell a little about James M. Black in between the songs. And I have a handout that goes with the program that has some songs that are not in this particular book by James M. Black. But he was a very interesting, very private person. There's only 3 photographs of him that are known to exist. One of them is the one that's on the cover of my book here. Another one is one with the choir at Pine Street United Methodist Church in Williamsport, where he sang in his latter years. And another one is with him and some of his brothers and relatives on a hunting trip. Those are the only 3 known photographs of James M. Black. He was a very, very private person, but he was very talented musically.
In addition, none of his houses even survive today. None of the places that he lived in?
That's correct. They've all been taken down for urban renewal in Williamsport. But he and his family lived in a series of houses in what's now downtown Williamsport that's built up in a commercial district. It's no longer a residential district. So, yes.
In fact, the only thing we really have of him is pretty much his tombstone.
Yeah, that's about it. His tombstone and 3 pictures.
And the hymn.
All the musical legends that he left, musical legacy that he left, yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Another person with ties to central Pennsylvania is P.P. Bliss. Tell us about P.P. Bliss.
P.P. Bliss is one of my very favorite songwriters. He was born in Clearfield County, which is up in the northern tier of Pennsylvania. He was born in a cabin with a dirt floor, very, very poor parents. And he was always interested in music. He was a big lad. He had big feet. He was big boned. He was tall for his size. And the story is told that the first time he ever heard a piano, he was walking back and forth between the town of Penfield in Clearfield County to his cabin with the dirt floor. And there was a lady in a house, a nice house, who was playing a piano. And the door was open. He had never heard a piano before. And he walked up and stood inside the open door and listening to her play the piano. And he was just transfixed. He was just amazed at this instrument and the sounds that were coming out. And when she stopped, he said, "Oh, dear lady, please play some more." She didn't know that he was standing there. She turned around and saw this big guy with the big feet standing there and said, "Young boy, get your big dirty feet out of my house right now." And he left. But that was his introduction to music, and he was just fascinated, and he went on to become a great gospel songwriter. The family was very poor, and he left home when he was about 14, and he traveled across the northern tier of Pennsylvania, just getting jobs from mining camp, lumber camp to lumber camp, and working on farms. He wound up in Towanda, Pennsylvania, which is in central Pennsylvania on the Susquehanna River, where he eventually got some formal schooling and wound up in Rome, Pennsylvania as part of the gospel songwriter community that lived there because of Daniel Brink Towner. Professor Towner had several famous gospel songwriters that lived and worked and wrote in Rome, Pennsylvania. And Rome, Pennsylvania calls itself the gospel song capital of the world.
Huh.
But he wound up there, and he wrote some very, very moving songs. One of my favorite songs is another one that I requested to be sung at my funeral, is Let the Lower Lights Be Burning. And that's a great song. P.P. Bliss was the song leader for several famous evangelists. And one time he was in an evangelistic meeting, and the evangelist told the story about a ship that was out on Lake Erie. And the ship was trying to make the harbor in the midst of a great big violent storm, but the lighthouse had gone out. And there was no way they were going to be able to navigate into the harbor without the lighthouse being there. And the captain said, can we do it? And the wheelmaster said, I don't know, but fortunately they had the lower lights along the shore to guide them, the houses, the shops, and so forth, and they had a rough idea of where things were. And the evangelist closed the meeting by saying, God will take care of the lighthouse, but it's up to us to be the lights along the shore to guide the people safely home. And that imagery stayed with P.P. Bliss, and he wrote the song, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning, send a gleam across the wave, some poor fainting, struggling seaman you may rescue, you may save. And whenever I have an opportunity to participate in or lead funeral services, if appropriate, I like to use that song and say that we're not all called upon to be Dwight Moody's or Billy Graham's, but we all can be lower lights. And the person that we're memorializing today was one of those lower lights, a faithful servant of Jesus Christ who didn't seek fame or glory, wasn't a great evangelist, didn't write a lot of books, wasn't a theologian, but was one of those very many lower lights that lead people to Christ. And I challenge people at funerals to be a lower light. And I like that song, and I requested it be sung at my funeral. And that's my desire, to be one of those lower lights. But that's a great song. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman you may rescue, you may save.
So tell us about the songs that he wrote that you'd find in hymnals today.
Well, there's 3 songs in the United Methodist hymnal that he wrote, and they illustrate his wide variety of musical abilities. He wrote Wonderful Words of Life, which is a very light song. Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. He wrote Hallelujah, What a Savior, which is a very majestic song. You'd find it hard to believe the same person wrote words and music to both those kinds of songs. He also wrote the music for It Is Well With My Soul, which is in many, many hymnals. And there's, of course, a great story behind It Is Well With My Soul. But those are just 3 songs that he wrote. I was at a camp meeting once in Lebanon County, and they asked me to give a program on P.P. Bliss, and so I did. And in the camp meeting hymnals that they had, there were 15 songs by P.P. Bliss. So we sang most of those 15 songs, and I told stories about P.P. Bliss and his life, and had a PowerPoint presentation on P.P. Bliss. And his wealth of ability is just amazing. That song, It Is Well With My Soul, he wrote the music to that. The words were written by a fellow by the name of Spafford. You probably know the story. It's a well-known story that his wife and 3 or 4 daughters were being transported by boat from the United States over to England, and they hit an iceberg, and the ship went down, and the wife made it. The daughters didn't, and she sent him back a telegram saying, "Saved alone," and all their daughters perished at sea and did not survive. And he went over on a boat to join her, and he asked the captain of the ship, "Tell me when you get to the spot where this tragedy occurred." And when they were at that spot, he wrote the song, the words, "It Is Well With My Soul." And he took those words and gave them to P.P. Bliss and asked P.P. Bliss to write the music for that, and P.P. Bliss did. P.P. Bliss died in 1876 in a very tragic train accident, and this was one of the last songs that he wrote before he died, "It Is Well With My Soul." Let me tell you the story of his death. It makes for an interesting story. He was living in Rome, Pennsylvania at that time, and this was right after Christmas in 1876. He was on his way to Chicago to participate in another evangelistic crusade as a song leader. And he and his wife were traveling on a train, And when the train came to Ashtabula, Ohio, it was a fierce winter storm, the end of December 1876. The trestle over which the train was crossing collapsed, and all the cars went down to the bottom. And back in those days, cars were heated by, believe it or not, stoves. They had stoves in each of the cars to heat them. And once the cars crashed down and the stoves in the cars, just everything burned up. And the story is that P.P. Bliss escaped the original accident, but went back into the burning cars to try and find his wife, and couldn't, and they both perished. They never found or identified most of the bodies in that crash. And so there's a mass grave in Ashtabula, Ohio today for that train wreck, for the victims of that train wreck. And at that time, in 1876, that was the largest loss of life of any train wreck in America. And P.P. Bliss was one of the people who died in that. I have an old lithograph that was made of that to memorialize that train wreck. And it shows a picture of the engineer on one side and P.P. Bliss on the other side. And it says, train wreck, Ashtabula, Ohio, in December of 1876. I also have a book that has a picture of that lithograph in it, a book about train wrecks. And it talks about famous train wrecks in history, and that book was written in the 1970s, and whoever wrote that book about train wrecks didn't know who P.P. Bliss was.
Oh.
He was an expert on train wrecks, but not an expert on P.P. Bliss. And so he has a picture of that lithograph in his book, and at the bottom he says, and pictured in the lithograph are the engineer and the brakeman of the train.
Oh.
He identifies P.P. Bliss as the brakeman on the train.
Oh.
P.P. Bliss had his picture on that lithograph because he was the most famous person that was killed in that particular lithograph and that particular train wreck. I've been to the site of his cabin where he was born in Clearfield County, and I've been down to the bottom of the ravine in Ashtabula, Ohio, where P.P. Bliss perished. But he is, as I said, one of my favorite songwriters. And there's a United Methodist Church in Bradford County today, near Towanda, that claims they're the ones who's really started him on his musical career. As I said, he was traveling across Pennsylvania, working at lumber camps and working on farms. And when he got to Leona, Pennsylvania, a very small rural town in Bradford County, he started working for a farmer, and the farmer went to the Leona Methodist Church. And this farmer noted that P.P. Bliss had quite an amazing voice. And he talked P.P. Bliss into singing in the church choir. So P.P. Bliss sang in the church choir. And after that, he went to Towanda, got a formal education, went to Rome and hooked up with Towner. But this congregation takes pride in claiming they're the ones who started P.P. Bliss on his musical career because they're the ones that got him encouraged to sing in the church choir. And I had a very amazing experience several years ago. I was leading a workshop for people from all over the northeastern United States on church history, and we were taking a tour of historical spots in Pennsylvania. And I took them to the Leona Church where this all happened. It's a very rural church. They don't even have indoor plumbing. They've got an outhouse in the back and so forth. But I took them to the church where P.P. Bliss sang in the choir, and the church that claims that they're the ones that started P.P. Bliss on his musical journey. And it was an evening meeting. It took place in the evening, and we had everything arranged, decorated for Christmas. It wasn't Christmas, it was actually May. But we decorated the church as if it were Christmas. And we told the people that this was the scenario, that we were going to pretend it was just after Christmas in 1876. And P.P. Bliss was leaving his home in Rome on his way to Chicago for this evangelistic service. And he wanted to stop in and visit his friends at Leona, the ones that started him on their musical ministry. And I had a P.P. Bliss impersonator, a man who looked just like P.P. Bliss, a great big fellow, big boned and so forth, big feet. And he sang some P.P. Bliss songs. And he talked about writing this song, the music to it as well, with my soul. And it was very moving. He said that this is one of my very last songs. I just wrote the music for this. And he said it summarizes my life. And I'm on my way down to Chicago. Of course, we knew he was going to get killed in a train wreck. He didn't know it. But he said, I'd like to sing this as my final song to you people, as a testimony to my life. It is well with my soul. I don't know what God has in the future for me, but whatever my lot, he's taught me to say it's well with my soul. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house as he sang that song, just like P.P. Bliss would have sung it. He looked just like P.P. Bliss. And that was a very, very moving experience. But he's one of my favorite gospel songwriters, P.P. Bliss. I should say that when he died, at first it was thought that he had two boys. It was thought that his two young sons perished with him also, with him and his wife. It turns out they didn't. They were back in Rome, Pennsylvania at their grandmother's house. And there was a rush to print things about P.P. Bliss. And I have some song books that were printed right after the train wreck. This is called Heavenward, Sunday School Songs. And it says here, with new and old favorites by P.P. Bliss. They added his name on the cover as a memorial. It included some of his songs in here. And this book here, Songs of P.P. Bliss, this was printed right after his death also in 1877. And it was a collection of songs of P.P. Bliss. And his home that he lived in Rome, Pennsylvania, is now a gospel song museum. And it's the P.P. Bliss Gospel Song Museum. It's open to the public. It's well worth a trip going up there to see it. And they have a model of the bridge that collapsed. They have a collection of a lot of his songbooks. I have a few gospel songbooks myself that are not in the collection up there. Maybe one day I'll give them to the collection up there. But P.P. Bliss, it's a fine place to visit.
There's another hymn writer from central Pennsylvania named Robert Lowry. What are some of the hymns by Robert Lowry that people might recognize?
Well, his most famous hymn is probably Shall We Gather at the River. He also wrote Low in the Grave He Lay, I Need Thee Every Hour, Marching to Zion, Nothing But the Blood, and so forth. We claim him as one of our sons. He was a Baptist related, and he was on the faculty up at what's now Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, which is right on the Susquehanna River. And the admissions house at Bucknell University in Lewisburg is the old Robert Lowry House. And they have a sign out in front that says Robert Lowry House, now the admissions house. And they have a little museum in there of some Robert Lowry items. The story is told, I think it's kind of apocryphal, but the story is told that he had the Susquehanna River in mind when he wrote Shall We Gather at the River. That's what the people up there say. The Susquehanna River is very impressive. The Susquehanna River in many places is over a mile wide.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, it's over a mile wide at Harrisburg. And Charles Dickens made a tour of the United States back in the 1800s. And he wrote back to his editor in London about his travels. And he talked about crossing the Susquehanna River at Harrisburg, and he said it was 1.25 miles wide. And the people back in London couldn't believe that. They thought it was a misprint. So when they printed it, they said it was 1/4 mile wide.
Oh, my.
But it's actually 1.25 miles wide at Harrisburg. The Susquehanna River is quite an impressive river. It's not very deep, but it's very wide, has a lot of islands in it and so forth. And the people up in Lewisburg like to say that Robert Lowry was inspired by the Susquehanna River when he wrote Shall We Gather at the River. Now, he didn't write it while he was living in Lewisburg, but it is possible that after he left Lewisburg, that image stayed in his mind, and it is possible that he did have that in mind when he wrote Shall We Gather at the River. But there is an interesting quote from Robert Lowry's biography that says this. This is quoting his biography. He says, "Once going from Harrisburg to Lewisburg, I got into a train car filled with half-drunken lumbermen. Suddenly, one of them struck up, 'Shall we gather at the river?' They sang it over and over again, repeating the chorus in a wild, boisterous way. I did not think so much of the music then as I listened to those singers, but I did think that perhaps the spirit of the hymn, the words so flippantly uttered, might somehow survive and be carried forward in the lives of those careless men, and ultimately lift them forward to the realization of the hope expressed in the hymn." But Shall We Gather at the River? Yeah, Robert Lowry.
Another person that I've noticed you have on your Historical Society marker is Edmond Lorenz. He became a hymnal publisher?
Yes, he did. He was on our United Brethren tradition. He was actually the president of Lebanon Valley College back in the 1800s. And he wrote hymns and edited hymn books and went on to found the Lorenz Publishing House, which is still in existence today in Ohio. And Edmond Lorenz was a very prominent person in the United Brethren Church and helped to organize and publish many of their hymnals, denominational hymnals. And the people that work in those denominational hymnals did a good job. And I'm pleased that we have our denominational hymnals today. And as I said, I'm the archivist for the United Methodist Church. And most of the hymn presentations that I give are in United Methodist churches. But regardless of what church you attend or what kind of hymnal you use, I encourage people to look in their hymnal in detail. It's amazing what you can find. Most hymnals will have on the back a list of all the composers and songwriters, words and music alphabetically, and you can see how many different hymns some of the writers have given us. You can also find a metrical index that'll tell you what meter different tunes use. And there are many tunes that use the same meter, which means you can take words from one song and sing another song. You can do all kinds of things with the hymnal. And there are things in the hymnal that a lot of people don't realize, backstories for some of the hymns. One of my favorite backstories is for Onward Christian Soldiers. That almost didn't make it into the United Methodist hymnal. There was a movement to try and eliminate that because it sounded militaristic. And there was an emphasis that we should be a church of love, not onward Christian soldiers. But the hymnal committee was finally convinced that it's not a militaristic hymn. It was written for children, marching in Sunday school and so forth. But the music to that was written by Sir Arthur Sullivan. And the tune that we sing today by Sir Arthur Sullivan is not the original tune that was to. It was originally sung to a different tune that wasn't very good. I do have a hymnal that has the old tune in, and believe me, it's not a very good tune. But Arthur Sullivan decided that those stirring words needed another tune, so he wrote the music that we now sing Onward Christian Soldiers to. But Arthur Sullivan, as it turns out, is the Sullivan from Gilbert and Sullivan.
Really?
Yes. Sir Arthur Sullivan was an organist at a very prominent, prestigious church in London, England, and he was a hymn writer. But being an organist and being a hymn writer does not pay the bills. And so he got together with Gilbert, and Gilbert and Sullivan wrote many operettas, and the story is that Sullivan did not like that. The words are very frivolous, the music is he thought beneath him, but it certainly did pay the bills. Gilbert wrote the words, Sullivan wrote the music, and that friendship or that partnership endured simply so Sir Arthur Sullivan could pay the bills. But the tune for Onward Christian Soldiers by Sir Arthur Sullivan is the Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Huh.
Something else to watch out for in the hymnals is sometimes modern hymnals change the words.
Really?
Sometimes they get rid of the these and thous and put in the yous and so forth and tidy up some of the King James language in the hymnals. But there are other reasons why the words are changed. And when I give hymn programs, I usually point that out. One reason is to eliminate sexism. References to men, especially God as a man, are toned down. One of the classic examples that I like to use is Stand Up for Jesus. That was written by a Presbyterian minister in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is just it's the next town down the road from...
James Duffield.
Yes, you're right. From the next town down the road from Mechanicsburg. There's a line in there originally that says, "Ye that are men now serve him." But the United Methodist Hymnal Committee didn't like that, ye that are men now serve him. They changed it to, "Ye that are brave now serve him." There's another line in there that says, "To him that overcometh." They've changed that from the him singular to make it plural, and it now reads, "To those that vanquish evil." So there's a move to eliminate all the things that make the song sound like it's particularly geared toward men. Another classic example of that is "Good Christian Men Rejoice," the Christmas song. In the United Methodist Hymnal, it's "Good Christian Friends Rejoice," not "Good Christian Men Rejoice." But a second reason for changing the words is to eliminate perceived racism. In particular, in our United Methodist Hymnal, there's several songs where it talks about being washed in the blood and we're now whiter than snow. Well, the word white has been removed and replaced with the word bright, because white, supposedly, if you associate white with good, that's putting down people who are not white and lifting up white supremacy, so forth. One of them is a Robert Lowry song. We had talked about Robert Lowry, but Robert Lowry's song, Nothing But the Blood, that's one of his famous songs. The chorus goes, "Oh, precious is the flow, that makes me white as snow." But in the United Methodist hymnal, "Oh, precious is the flow, that makes me bright as snow." They've eliminated all the whites, and now the whites are now bright. A third reason for changing some of the words has to do with respect for people with disabilities. One of the classic examples of that is Charles Wesley's great hymn, "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing." There's one verse in there. Let me get it right here. One verse in that song that says, "Hear him, ye deaf, his praise ye dumb, your loosened tongues employ. Ye blind, behold your Savior come, and leap ye lame for joy." And there's an asterisk by that verse. That verse is printed. Some hymnals eliminate that verse altogether, but there's an asterisk in our hymnal that says that verse may be omitted. And it's the idea that it kind of implies that if you're deaf or dumb or blind or lame, that there's something wrong that needs to be healed, something less than perfect. And it could be viewed as putting people down. The same thing is true of the song "Just As I Am." There's a verse in there that goes, "Just as I am, poor wretched blind, sight healing of the mind," and so forth, that I long to find. And some hymnals eliminate that verse because it seems to say that if you're blind, there's something wrong and you need to be corrected. So it's difficult. Songs were written in a day when people talked differently, used King James language, talked about ships, talked about farming, and weren't quite so politically correct and sensitive to different genders and races and so forth, maybe the way they should have been. So that's an open question. Should we change some of these words, or should we leave them the way they are and respect the historicity of them? It's a difficult call, but I try to call attention in my hymn programs to words that have been changed and talk about why they were changed. Yeah.
So in your career, you're not a hymn historian by profession or by training.
No.
How have these hymns guided you to making this almost kind of your second profession?
Well, I enjoy hymns. I live here in Mechanicsburg. The archives are up in Williamsport, which is over a 2-hour drive, and I do that at least once a week, driving back and forth. And I sing songs driving back and forth. I go through some areas where you really can't get very good reception on the radio, and so I just turn off the radio and I sing a lot of gospel songs. And some people quote Bible verses, and I'm certainly not against that, and I've done my share of Bible memorization. But to me, the songs, particularly the gospel songs, are what inspire me and keep me going. And I grew up singing gospel songs, and I like them today. And I guess they just became a part of me, and I like to do that.
Great. Well, Dr. Loyer, thank you so much for taking of your time and sharing with us your passion and sharing with us some of the history behind some of the hymns, the gospel songs, and the songwriters that many of us know and love.
I've enjoyed it, and I enjoy going to different churches. When I'm invited to give a hymn program at a church, I ask for a copy of their hymnal, and I'll take their hymnal and find out what songs in their hymnal were written by Kirkpatrick or Fanny Crosby or whoever. I do hymn programs on Fanny Crosby. She's another delightful person. She doesn't have any direct claim to central Pennsylvania, but there's another person whose gospel songs will live on for forever and ever. But whenever I do hymn programs, I try to identify with the particular hymnal that's being used in that church and the particular denomination that I'm in, and tie in their denominational heritage and their hymn book heritage with the program, and encourage people to do more of that themselves, to look through their own hymnals and find out what's there. There's a lot of good stuff in hymnals.
That's true. That is true. Thanks again for being with us. I'm Randy Melchard, and this is Our Christian Heritage.